In the early 1800s, the Rocky Mountains were a treasure trove of furs, a resource so valuable it drove intrepid trappers westward into uncharted territory. This was a land devoid of roads and maps, dominated by colossal peaks and rivers that could swiftly turn deadly. Sudden storms were commonplace. Ice could give way without warning, and a wrong turn meant getting lost. Food running low, water dwindling, with predators potentially lurking nearby. Survival in this era hinged on possessing critical knowledge before danger struck. The mountain men mastered these skills, abilities now largely lost to time. What were they, and could they still offer salvation today? We begin naturally with the paths forged by water. Number 1. Following rivers and waterways. As navigational routes, mountain men required neither compasses nor elaborate charts. Rivers served as their primary guides. Waterways carved passages through the wilderness, traversing canyons, bypassing obstacles, and leading directly to game, trading posts, and potential shelter. Proficiency in interpreting a river's language was fundamental to survival. Consider the Lewis and Clark expedition, whose main route into the unknown was the Missouri River. Commissioned by President Jefferson to chart a path across the continent via water, they faced immense challenges. Treacherous rapids, volatile currents, and hidden snags threatened their vessels and their lives. Yet, the river remained their essential guide, demanding their trust and understanding. Trappers and traders like Manuel Lisa, Robert Stewart, and Jedediah Smith similarly pursued beaver pelts deep into the mountains by following the Platte, Snake, and Columbia rivers. While traveling downstream offered the advantage of the current, moving against it was a grueling effort. Selecting the most efficient upstream passage could mean the difference between a successful journey and facing starvation through a harsh winter. Knowledge was paramount for any wilderness traveler. In this period, Zadok Kramer's publication, The Navigator, became an indispensable resource. For $1, a significant sum then, men eagerly acquired copies detailing river routes, notable landmarks, and hazards. By 1814, it had expanded to a substantial 369 pages, packed with maps and notes on rivers from the Monongahela to the Mississippi. However, no book could substitute for direct experience. Mountain men learned the nuances of rivers firsthand by traversing them. They developed an eye for danger, detecting a submerged rock by a subtle ripple, or recognizing the silent threat of a whirlpool. They also used natural landmarks, distinct boulders, sharp bends, or solitary trees, to maintain orientation. David Thompson, a renowned mapmaker, meticulously charted the Columbia River between 1807 and 1812, demonstrating its potential as a vital trade corridor. John Coulter, one of the first non-native individuals to explore the Yellowstone region, also depended heavily on rivers to find his way through its geysers and rugged peaks. The seasoned trapper understood that when lost, the most reliable strategy was to locate water and follow it. A river always led somewhere. Boats were equally crucial tools. Canoes, keelboats, and rafts each had specific uses. Canoes offered speed and maneuverability. Keelboats carried significant cargo in deeper water. Rafts were employed when other options failed. A mountain man had to contend with the water, adapt to its conditions, and often fight just to stay alive. Seasonal timing was another critical factor. The ideal period for river travel was when currents were stable, avoiding the fury of spring floods or the low water levels of summer drought. Misjudging the season could render a crossing perilous. Crucially, the deepest river wisdom resided with the native tribes who had navigated these waters for centuries. They possessed invaluable knowledge of shortcuts, safe crossings, and hidden dangers. Any mountain man who disregarded their expertise risked a short career. In essence, rivers were lifelines in the Rockies. Navigate them wisely, and they provided access to sustenance, shelter, and commerce. Be careless, and you could become another statistic lost to the flow. While water provided primary routes, when it was unavailable, the mountain man turned to the land itself. Number 2. Interpreting mountain ranges and valleys for orientation. Again, mountain men lacked maps, but possessed keen instinct, hard-won experience, and the ability to read the land. The Rockies were immense and formidable, yet a trained eye could decipher their contours like a text. Jim Bridger exemplified this, traversing the distance from the Missouri to the Great Salt Lake by using rivers, valleys, and peaks as his compass. He didn't follow established trails, he forged new ones. John Coulter, too, moved through unknown territories guided solely by his senses and the knowledge gained from indigenous mentors. What distinguished these legends was their capacity to read the landscape like a map composed of signs most people would overlook: the specific curve of a valley, the direction of water runoff, the way wind channeled through a mountain pass. They understood that mountains dictated movement. A ridgeline could be an insurmountable barrier or a viable passage. A river's course indicated a path, but could also trap a traveler depending on the season. Joseph Bigeaud, a highly skilled scout, leveraged his extensive knowledge of the Rockies to guide Major Stephen H. Long's expedition, knowing precisely when to advance and when to retreat. In the challenging terrain of the Rockies, errors were often fatal. Confronted by a sudden rock slide, an impassable gorge, or a swollen river, plans had to be abandoned or drastically altered with speed and decisiveness. The approach was to work with the land when possible, force a way through when necessary, and construct shelters capable of enduring the mountain's fury. Life in the Rockies demanded resilience. The cold was a lethal threat. Isolation could break a spirit, and the terrain offered no concessions. When familiar landmarks failed and the land offered no clear direction, the sky became the indispensable map. Number 3. Navigating using the sun and stars. Instead of a magnetic compass, the celestial sphere provided mountain men with all the directional information they needed. At dawn, they observed where the sun emerged, east. At dusk, they knew west. At noon, their shadow pointed north. This simple observation formed a basic orientation. True skill emerged at night. Polaris, the North Star, was the mountain man's constant point of reference. It remained fixed above the North Pole. Facing it meant facing true north. To locate it, they first found the Big Dipper. The two stars forming the outer edge of its bowl pointed directly towards Polaris, roughly 5 times their separation away. This required no instruments, only a clear view of the night sky. If clouds obscured the Big Dipper, Cassiopeia, a distinctive W-shaped constellation opposite Polaris, offered an alternative means of triangulation. John Wesley Powell, the one-armed explorer who famously charted the Green and Colorado rivers in 1869, possessed a deep understanding of celestial navigation. His crew initially used a sextant and chronometers to determine their position. However, after losing their precision timepieces in a boating accident, they relied on the angles of the sun and moon to estimate time and distance, crucial for navigating the unexplored canyons. Celestial navigation wasn't just for sailors. Anyone traversing wild country could utilize heavenly bodies for guidance. A person who understood the sky could find their way regardless of how deep they ventured into the Rockies. Locating the North Star was step 1. Understanding its significance was step 2. Anywhere in the northern hemisphere, Polaris sits at an angle above the horizon roughly equal to the observer's latitude. Without instruments, a mountain man could make a rough estimate using his hand. An outstretched fist at arm's length typically spans about 10 degrees of altitude. Stacking fists could provide a rough measure of one's northerly position. Orion's belt offered another useful trick. These three bright stars, aligned in a row, consistently rise near true east and set near true west. The trailing star, Mintaka, is particularly reliable, rarely deviating by more than a single degree. Thus, mastery of the night sky provided dependable direction. A widely practiced technique in the 1800s, like the old chuckwagon master's rule, involved aligning the wagon tongue with the North Star at night to ensure the crew had a clear bearing by morning. In the wilderness, such small habits could determine survival. A man either learned to find his direction or risked getting lost and never returning. Sometimes, the most effective path was one already imprinted on the land by those who knew it best. Number 4. Utilizing animal paths and indigenous trails. Mountain men rarely blazed entirely new routes in the Rockies. Instead, they wisely followed the trails already etched into the landscape by wildlife and Native American tribes, who had established these networks long before trappers like John Coulter and Jim Bridger arrived. These existing paths offered passage through rugged peaks, dense forests, and high plateaus in areas where no maps existed. In the winter of 1807–08, Coulter famously rode alone for 500 miles, guided by trails previously used by Crow and Shoshone hunters. He was not discovering unknown routes, but rather the first European American to document them. By the 1840s, with bison populations west of the Continental Divide dwindling, the Shoshone and Bannock peoples, traditionally plains hunters, adapted their strategies. They developed a new migration route eastward across the Yellowstone Plateau, known today as the Bannock Trail. Originating in Idaho, this trail traversed Targhee Pass, curved through the Madison River Basin, and ascended the Gallatin Mountains. It then descended along Indian Creek, crossed Snow Pass, climbed Lava Creek, and reached the meadows of Black-tailed Deer Creek. Near the Yellowstone River, it branched, one fork heading towards Lamar Valley and the other into the Absaroka Range. For nearly 4 decades, tribes relied on this path to hunt the remaining buffalo herds, often contending with rival groups and U.S. soldiers, until the Bannock War of 1878 brought its use to an end. By the 1860s, these same indigenous paths were being adopted by white explorers. Prospectors had been using sections since 1864, and in 1869, the Cook-Folsom-Peterson expedition utilized these ancient routes to enter the Yellowstone region. They rode from Bozeman Pass, followed Meadow Creek upstream, and descended into the Yellowstone drainage. From there, they tracked the river south to its confluence with the Gardner, then turned across the Black-tailed Deer Creek Plateau and up Rescue Creek. Their journey, step by step, followed the footsteps of previous travelers. Although their published account in 1870 garnered significant public interest, the trails themselves were not new discoveries. Later that year, the Washburn-Langford-Doane expedition retraced their route, delving further into Yellowstone via these same indigenous paths. They mapped and studied the landscape, but the fundamental network of passages had been charted over centuries by Native Americans, not with ink and paper, but through generations of travel and survival, marked by moccasins and hoofprints. When established trails vanished, nature itself provided subtle clues for those with the expertise to read them. Number 5. Interpreting trees, moss, and geological features. Across various cultures and periods, natural elements like trees, moss, and rivers have served as navigational aids, with each feature holding potential clues. Mountain men were aware that moss often grows more thickly on the north side of trees. However, this wasn't a foolproof indicator, as moss growth is primarily dictated by shade and moisture, not solely direction. More dependable were the trees' growth patterns. In the Rocky Mountains, branches typically grow more robustly on the south side, reaching towards the sun. A keen observer could use this characteristic to maintain a consistent bearing. A practiced eye recognized this pattern, interpreted the forest, and knew the cardinal directions. Prominent natural landmarks were also vital. A distinctive rock spire, an unusually shaped tree, or a significant river bend. These memorable features acted as crucial waypoints in the vast wilderness. Native Americans, however, employed a more deliberate system. They shaped young saplings by bending them down and securing them until they matured into permanent markers. Accounts of such trail marker trees date back to at least 1828 in areas like present-day Illinois. These trail trees often pointed towards water sources, safe shelters, or accessible mountain passes. Even when the landscape was blanketed in deep winter snow, a skilled scout could still discern these signs. It was important, however, to distinguish true trail markers from trees naturally deformed by storms, lightning, or fallen timber. The key difference lay in the details. A genuine trail tree exhibited a clear, intentional bend, a living signpost left by the land's original inhabitants. Mountain men who understood what to look for could traverse miles of wilderness without losing their way. For indigenous tribes, the land was a map. Some marker trees indicated water, others led to hunting grounds or safe river crossings. A select few designated sacred areas, council sites where tribes convened, crucial decisions were made, and oral histories were shared. One well-known council site, marked by trees curving sharply outwards before turning upwards again, established by the Ottawa people in 1830, still exists in northern Michigan. Even after native populations were forcibly removed from their territories, pioneers and traders often followed these recognizable signs. Their meanings passed down through generations. By the early 20th century, the historical significance of these trail trees began to be recognized. Plaques were erected, articles were published, and the first official marker, dedicated in 1911, stood near the Green Bay Trail. A line of 11 trees there still pointed north, remnants of a vast network that once connected river routes and portage trails across the Great Lakes region. Beyond specific trail trees, mountain men observed everything in nature. The way trees leaned, how moss clung to bark, the location of ant hills, all provided clues. Ants, for example, tend to build mounds where they receive maximum sunlight, typically on southern exposures. Similarly, the densest vegetation often thrives on sun-drenched southern slopes. For those who paid attention, the wilderness was constantly offering directional information. While landmarks kept mountain men on course, survival also demanded anticipating the sky's intentions. Number 6. Reading wind patterns and predicting weather. In the unforgiving environment of the Rockies, misjudging the weather could prove fatal. A clear dawn might precede a deadly blizzard by evening. Lacking weather reports or instruments like barometers, mountain men relied solely on their keen observation, intuition, and accumulated experience of the sky. They first interpreted the wind. A consistent wind from the west generally indicated stable, fair weather ahead. An east wind, conversely, often signaled approaching trouble, rain, snow, or worse. The wind's characteristics, its strength, direction, and even temperature, served as vital indicators of brewing atmospheric changes. Clouds provided the rest of the narrative. Recognizing cloud formations could offer a day's warning, crucial time to find shelter before a storm hit. Mountain men watched the clouds with unwavering focus. High, thin, wispy cirrus clouds typically meant good weather would persist. Thick, gray altostratus rolling in warned of an impending storm. Cirrostratus, thin, hazy sheets high up, suggested moisture within 12 to 24 hours. Altocumulus clouds, appearing patchy and rippled, indicated a significant system moving in rapidly, arriving in hours rather than days. Low-lying stratus suggested impending drizzle, while puffy stratocumulus meant dry conditions would hold. However, the appearance of heavy, dark nimbostratus confirmed that precipitation was already falling. Observing the clouds long enough allowed the sky to communicate as clearly as any map. The wind, too, had its distinct messages. Strong winds usually signaled a pressure change associated with a nearby storm. Direction was regionally significant. A west wind might promise clear skies in one area, while an east wind brought rain. Mountain men learned the specific patterns of their operating region, read these signs, and adjusted their movements before the weather turned against them. Beyond wind and clouds, even a simple campfire could reveal atmospheric secrets. Adding extra leaves to the fire and observing the smoke's behavior provided clues. If the smoke rose straight up, it indicated low atmospheric pressure, a sign of impending weather change. If it sank and clung to the ground, pressure was high, suggesting stable, clear conditions. No gadgets were needed, just sharp senses and hard-earned knowledge. In the Rockies, this could be the difference between reaching shelter and being buried under feet of snow. Even the night sky offered warnings. A halo around the moon, caused by ice crystals or dust in the upper atmosphere, signaled approaching rain or snow. If stars appeared to twinkle more intensely than usual, it suggested dropping air pressure and rising humidity, a sign that bad weather was not far off. Furthermore, even plants could exhibit warning signs. Some small flowers, like stitchwort and chickweed, would tightly close their blossoms when rain was imminent. Others, such as morning glory, might open their flowers at unusual times if they sensed a storm approaching. Nothing in the wilderness was left unobserved. Every atmospheric shift, the rustle of leaves, the faint glint of moonlight, all communicated potential future conditions. The men who heeded these whispers survived. Those who didn't often paid a heavy price. Since mountain men could read the weather, they also needed methods to ensure others could follow their routes. Number 7. Marking routes with symbols and stone cairns. Navigating the Rockies was challenging. Trails could vanish under new snow, rivers changed course, and landmarks appeared different under varying light conditions. A single wrong turn could cost a man his life. Consequently, as mentioned earlier, mountain men adopted techniques from those most familiar with the land, Native American tribes. They learned how to mark trails, leave specific signs, and interpret the landscape as a map inscribed in stone and wood. In addition to the practice of bending trees, indigenous peoples used another effective method, blazing. A few swift cuts with a knife or hatchet removed bark from a tree, creating a pale, visible scar. When aligned along a path, these blazes guided travelers through dense forests where visibility was otherwise poor. Where trees were scarce, rock cairns served the same purpose. Carefully stacked piles of stones stood resilient against the wind, marking paths through open or barren high country. In blizzards or heavy fog, these cairns could be the sole indicator preventing a traveler from becoming permanently lost. This marking system was not infallible. If one built a cairn but couldn't spot the next one, they were in trouble. Losing sight of blazes could lead to days of wandering in circles. However, for those with the right observational skills and wilderness instinct, these markers transformed the wild into a landscape that could be read and followed. As is often said, the mountains are unforgiving of mistakes. The men who survived were those who could read the land, the sky, and the water. Without modern gear or second chances, their survival depended entirely on skill and intuition. Most of these vital wilderness skills are now largely forgotten. Yet, if circumstances ever demand fending for oneself in the wild, they might be the only things that can see you through. For those interested in wilderness survival accounts, tips, and the lessons learned the hard way, further exploration of these stories is highly recommended.